We're excited to be here and talking about 40X. When I first joined Franklin-Covey, it was with our execution practice. And for me, it just made so much sense. We spend a whole lot of time, my background is in organizational development, executive coaching. You know, how do you make organizations better, right? What's the human component of how you make an organization better? And what became really clear is the humans are the best part of your organization, and they can also be the most challenging part of the organization. Would that be accurate? All the things that makes them wonderful also provides a little bit of a challenge from time to time. One of the things that I think for me, as you look at the research on execution, and there really is a ton of it, Stanford's book, The Knowing-Doing Gap, is probably the one for me that really just, first of all, after you get a few pages in, you're going to go, duh, you know. Like, in essence, here it is. I'll give the cliff notes. It's a great book, but if you don't have 600 pages in you. You know, the idea is that humans generally know what the right thing is to do to get something done. They just don't always do it. Knowing and doing, two different things. Shocking, huh? Has anyone ever tried to lose a few pounds? Actually, Sean uses this example all the time, and it cracks me up, because he's like, you know, it's like dieting, right? You know, everybody knows you just have to control intake, calories brought in, exercise. If you're in the middle of a diet and somebody gives you that dime of wisdom, what are you really thinking at the time, right? You're like, easy for you to say, you son of a bug, right? So the idea is that even though the gap between knowing the right thing to do and actually doing it is about as human as anything out there, it still is our biggest opportunity organizationally. If each person in our organization, regardless of their role, was able to just get a little bit more done within the realm of their reality, how much more effective would the organization as a whole be? It really begins to think about the flywheel, you know, when you think about good to great. How much would it take to get that moving? So when we look at 40X, that's really the fundamentals of what we're looking at. Okay. We're not hooked up.
No.
So one of the things that became crystal clear and worked with organizations early on in the days of execution was this idea that there was also an understanding gap with leadership from time to time. So I spent a lot of time working with senior leadership teams across organizations. I would say almost always, when you would meet with the leader in the organization and you would say, what are the top goals in your organization? They would rattle them off. And then I would say, how many people in your organization know that they're the top goals? Everybody knows they're the top goals. Everybody knows. I talk about them all the time. I email them all the time. They're on posters. Everybody knows. Now, do you already know the next part of it? I know you do, because half of you are laughing. Of course you do, because I'm sitting there going, no way, buddy. I mean, I suspect some of them know. In one organization we were working with, we were beginning a really large execution conversation. So I was in a week in advance, and I just walked around meeting some senior people on the team, some mid-level managers, and every single person, the first thing I'd ask is, do you know the goals of the organization? And every single one of them said, sure I do. They would pull something out of their desk, they would pull something off their bulletin board, they would say, here are the goals of the organization. By the time of just 1 week, kind of randomly wandering around, I had a file folder of organizational goals. Dare I say they were not all the same organizational goals, but they were goals all right. In meeting with the senior leadership team at the very beginning of this execution conversation, when the executive said, I know my people know their goals, I pulled out the file. And I said, well, how about this? Page through them, maybe like 6 pages in, he just closes it. He goes, okay, we have a problem. And here's the thing is all those things were good things to get done, right? Nobody in there had a goal that was crazy or not a good thing to do. It's just they were not aligned, and they clearly did not support what was identified at the senior level. And that's why when we look at what we have going on, we know that identifying what is the most important goal, that clarity component, it's not just getting the executive leadership team together and saying, okay, huddle up, this is what's most important. Because if you cannot drive that clarity through your organization, your goal is never going to be achieved. If you think about the shape of this pyramid, what you're looking at is where is the largest population in your organization? It's at the bottom of that pyramid, right? Who do you think knows the goals the best? The top of the pyramid. So there's just, from a flat out manpower perspective, we have a problem, right? And so the ability to make sure everybody from top to bottom is crystal clear and engaged in what the goal is becomes the critical factor. And one would suggest if you are mid-level management, you're even senior team, what we identified, we call it the whirlwind. You might call it many other things. But the whirlwind is what gets in the way of execution of the goals. When we talk about the whirlwind, we talk about everyday life, right? We've all been there. You sit in a strategy meeting or a team retreat, and you sit down and get focused on what the goals are. You feel connected to what has to happen, committed even. And then you walk out the door, you check your email, your text, put out a dozen fires. Before you know it, that strategy meeting seems like a long time away. And so the whirlwind takes over, and nobody consciously says, no, I'm not going to. They just disappear. Well, maybe in some cases. They disappear into the whirlwind, which is very easy to do because the whirlwind is urgent, it acts on you, it's calling you, and it requires you to attend it. The goals are important, but not urgent. They're typically long views of what has to happen to make an organization successful. They won't break down tomorrow, but over time, they weaken what you're trying to achieve as a whole. Does that make sense? And so the 4 disciplines of execution were really born out of the need to help us stay focused on the goals and survive the work. Pretty fundamental. By popular request, we were asked to share this video as part of the execution content because there is something interesting when you look at Saturday morning soccer. I don't know how you spent hours, days, weeks, or years of life on the side of a soccer field. And you know, it starts with very little guys playing swarm soccer, right? Wherever the ball is, that's where they all are. And then you start thinking about this whole concept of execution. The time is scarily connected. So I want to share this with you.
Spread out, everybody! Spread out! Sophie, sweetie, pass it to Trent! Trent! Okay, that's good, that's good! practiced. Remember? No, not that thing. The other thing we practiced. Okay, time out. Time out. Everybody, come in. Come in now, everybody. Treats! I got treats! Ah, there we go. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do, all right? Andy, I want you out on the wing. Trent, I want you to fake the pass to Andy and push the ball up the field, and then pass the ball to your forwards who are Sophie and Chris. Sophie, I want you to hold the ball and draw the defense out to you, all right? Then I want you to float a lob pass all the way over the defense to Chris. Chris, you take it in for the score, just like we did in practice. Everybody got it? Let's go get him!
Do you see any similarities between Saturday morning soccer and Monday morning at the office? I mean, think about it. Too often, teams and organizations are unclear about the goals their top priorities really are. Coaches and players are simply not on the same page. What you get is everyone just kind of running around in all directions instead of working together toward the same goal. The inability to take high-level goals and strategies of an organization and then to translate those into action is a major problem in most organizations. It's one thing to come up with great strategies and goals, but it's quite another to actually get them done. This is what we could call the execution gap. In a landmark study done by the Harris Polling Group, we discovered some revealing statistics as to why execution breaks down and why goals aren't translated into action on the front line. First finding, only 15% of those surveyed can actually identify their organization's most important goals or top priorities. Either there are too many goals, or they change too often, or they simply don't have any. And in most cases, they are vastly undercommunicated. Just because the leaders are clear on what they want to achieve, it doesn't necessarily mean that the front line where the action really happens knows what the goals are. After all, in a very real sense, the front line produces the bottom line. Second, people may know what the goals are, but too often they haven't bought into them. Only 19% surveyed say that they feel passionate about the top goals of their organizations. That's only 1 in 5. There are a number of reasons for this, but the primary one is that they feel no ownership. They don't feel that they have input into what it's going to take to achieve the goal. They simply aren't emotionally connected to the goal. No involvement, no commitment. Third, those surveyed reported that they spend only 49% of their available work hours on their most important goals. The rest of the time is spent on urgent, but far less important activities. They get so distracted by urgent things that they neglect the most important things. Finally, people might know what the goals and top priorities are. They might even buy into them, but they don't know what they are supposed to do about them. In fact, 51% state that they personally do not understand what they are supposed to do to help the organization achieve its goals. Goals will not be executed until everyone clearly understands what the goal is and what they themselves specifically need to do to meet that goal. Once people are clear on what the goal is, then and only then are they free to try new and better ways to reach that goal. So the point is, to achieve goals you've never achieved before, you simply need to start doing things you've never done before. You might ask, is it possible to dramatically and measurably improve your team's ability to reach its goals? Can it really happen? My answer is absolutely. Just imagine the impact when everyone on the team is crystal clear about what the goals are. Imagine the energy and creativity that would be unleashed when everyone in the organization is committed and involved in achieving the goals. Consider the economic impact when everyone on the team is spending the majority of their time on top priorities. Just think what can be accomplished when every player on the team knows exactly what to do. The possibilities, my friends, are limitless.
So what were the 4 things Steve called out? What are the 4 things?
Number 1. Yeah, 8 people can identify the goals. How many people can identify them? 50%. Yeah, but when Meg was talking about going into the organization and asking people, do you know what the goal is? Of course people are going to answer yes. We do ask the second question. What are they? 15%. Now here's the really scary part about this. We meet with the entry teams and we say, when do we get to give them credit for the right answer? And a lot of times the teams are just going, just so long as they get the verb right. Enrollment! You know, it's that narrow. What's the other breakdowns? Buy-in, engagement. Did you see how low that number was? 19%. Yeah. When people aren't committed and engaged, is it easy to watch this thing die like everything else they've tried? If people aren't committed into it, it doesn't work. Hard to create change. By the way, what we're really talking about is changing human behavior. Human behavior, easy to change or hard? Hard. How about somebody else's behavior? Yeah, a whole bunch of somebody else's. How about your spouse? I love my wife was married to me before she understood that one. Yeah, no, this is really tough stuff. Other breakdowns, what'd you see? Yeah, doing other things, busy doing other things. What I find interesting about these statistics is they ask how much time you spend working on that top priority. And they said like 49%. We couldn't even identify what it was. So what are they spending their time on? It's the other day job stuff. Now, I may have showed this slide, I just really want to illustrate when it's vital and important. She said, of course, whirlwind feels what? Urgent. Goals feel important, but lack the same feeling of urgency. This is a really critical thing because if you think about this, you probably, many of you, do you give goals to people, you do some kind of annual review processes, that kind of stuff? Show of hands, people who do that kind of thing. Okay? How many of your people actually, a lot of the time, let's get real around this, forget about it until about week 50? Yeah, let's raise our hand. You know, we do that. Oh, it's kind of like the panic moment. Oh crap, what did I sign up to do last year? I better pull it out of the drawer to figure it out. And then you spend 2 weeks trying to demonstrate to your boss how you effectively really impact that. That really did nothing. If we look at what the premise of the Orbis is to create an artificial sense of urgency for something that has no inherent urgency of its own. We're going to give that importance, that same sense of urgency that the whirlwind gets all by itself. Some of you, I bet, are feeling the whirlwind right now. Is that true? You might even be saying, this is really interesting stuff. But today, of all days, I got a crisis going on. You might even be trying to do a prayer at the table. Looking at your emails right now, that's the whirlwind pulling you. And the thing that we're dealing with here is think about all the grand initiatives and strategies that you see die. How did they die? Did they come out with a loud thundering crash? Or they slowly suffocated over time by the day job? If you've experienced a goal that's been suffocated by the day job, you have an opportunity to do something very different about it. We're going to give it life through the process of 4 disciplines. You interested in hearing what those are? Okay. So context.
Let's change out mics.
Is it not working?
Not enough.
Not enough?
I mean, you're not enough. You're plenty enough.
Not plenty, yeah.
But the mic could use a little help.
Okay. Here, let me just hold this here. Ooh, is that better? Yeah, now I can sing Mac the Knife. We'll just do this for a little while. Okay, so context, artificial sense of urgency for something that has no inherent urgency of its own through process. And that's essentially what the 4 disciplines are. They're a process. I'm going to show them to you. How many of you have either read the book or had some exposure to it? So some number of you have. So you might actually, if you've taken the time, said, really? I just took, a day to read a book that said, know what to do, know the goal, keep score, and hold each other accountable. Really? Kind of like Mate was saying. Diet and exercise? Really? Yeah, so we're going to tell that to you, but what we're going to do is put it in such a way that it works really well at an organizational level. And we're going to do it through game theory. Instead of mandating this, we're going to create a World Series. We're going to create our version of the Super Bowl. We're going to create a winnable game in the midst of the whirlwind. People are suckers for anything that feels at least a little bit like a game. And we're going to get them in that game so that they're playing that game. That's how we get that front line engaged. So I'm going to give you 3 watch-outs before I introduce what are the 4 disciplines. So the first is don't be fooled by the simplicity. The first watch-out says, this stuff says easy, but does really hard. You've already said changing behavior is very difficult, and you're going to demonstrate that to yourselves as you go through this. Second watch-out for you. One of the reasons it's so hard, especially for ambitious people, is it's really quite counterintuitive. Even though we say, yeah, it makes perfect sense, we're actually genetically hardwired to do the opposite of these disciplines. And that's one of the poles that's going against us. And then the third watch out for you is please don't look at this and say, ooh, the 1 through 3 was really cool, but 4, not so much. These are a match set, and they build on each other. We goof up the first one, you can watch it implode. But they are required to do in sequencing with each other, in continuity. Make sense? Okay, here we go. First discipline. We're going to focus on what we call the wildly important. Okay, now you're not hearing me say most important. We're going to call it wildly important. And part of what I want to do with our context today is talk about where do you apply this and where doesn't it fit well? Okay? This is around how do you accomplish those strategic goals that require a change in behavior. Okay? Not a stroke of the pen where it's like perhaps we're going to add a new building and you might have a project that's associated with that, but if you have the power, the autonomy, and the authority to get something done and you can basically write that check, you don't need people changing behavior. You don't need to run that through the 4 disciplines. You're probably going to use traditional project management for something like that. You're also not going to lay this down on top of your whole whirlwind. Try running this process on top of everything you do, and it will drive you nuts. But introducing the processes, and we're going to show you piece by piece how this plays out, not just by discipline, but how it applied at Alamo. Where's our friends from Alamo? Great. So I may call on you occasionally. If I do, I'm going to say, keep it short, because we only have an hour. But we can brag with each other at the bar later. Okay, yeah. So focus on the wildly important. And what we're basically saying here is, isn't it true that within your world, when you have lots of data around your performance in the organization, you keep lots of metrics. Are you metric heavy? Yeah. And a lot of times those metrics are translated to organizations that people will call them goals. And you start freaking people out when you say, we're going to narrow the focus on the number of goals that you're going to try to change. And people will say, well, Doug, I've got all this stuff going on over here. You're telling me to ignore that. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying if you consider what's really happening on the left, it's really around sustaining or maintenance. A lot of the things that we have on the left-hand side that we call goals are really like oil exception lights on your dashboard. You respond to them when they go intolerant, but if you can kind of stick your head up over the cubicle and make noise about it and have it go from red to green, you've got systems and processes for keeping it in bay. It's okay. And you're going to have a lot of those. But when we say narrow your focus on the wildly important, we're saying if one of these things is chronically red, it's creating a pain for you, and no amount of communication is changing it. People actually have to do things differently. You need to run it through a different process. So that's one of the candidates for how we select wildly important goals. You either have a pain or you have the probability of a gap closure that requires a gain. It's possible that you're doing well, but you know you could do a lot better if we could get more people on it. Is this making sense? So we pull it out. It becomes a WIG not because it's most important. It becomes a WIG because it requires the treatment of the 4 disciplines for the organization to become habitual on it. After you run it for a while, it becomes habitual. What happens to it? Where does it go? Yeah, right back to the whirlwind. You find something else to run through the process. This is like the execution cannon. You just load it with different ammunition. What goals are you going to run through it on a regular basis? How are we doing so far? Making sense? Okay, good. So typically, this starts looking like you start with something that's wildly important. Meg, what might that be with a group like this? Retention. Graduation rates, things like that. We're saying that's critically important. And then we're going to ask the question, what's the fewest number of supporting sub-WIGs that would ensure the success? Not what's the most number that we can work on, but what's the fewest number? And formulaically then, as we start to deconstruct that WIG, often you'll hear the term goal cascading. Have you guys heard that? Goal cascading? The problem with goal cascading is as you go from level 1, you go to 3 goals when you get to generation number 2. At the generation 3, you're normally at 9 goals. At generation 4, when you start getting to the front line, you're up to 18 to 32. And the frontline people are, the biggest fear that they have is that you're in a room like this trying to figure out what to do to them with the next 32 goals you're going to come up with. With this deconstruction process, we're really narrowing down what are the finite number of things that we need to drive that are going to ensure the success of. And that's the process of discipline 1. Okay? As an example, if we were trying to increase degrees, and this is Alamo. This mic is fading in and out too. Yeah. So you can see we're going to go from 1426 to 1567 by August 2015. How'd we do? You guys can brag right now. Yeah, it's not August yet, but they met it a year ahead of time using the process. Pretty interesting. So then we ask the question, what are the fewest number of battles to do it? Well, let's increase the course-based success rate. Let's increase student persistence. And then at the same time, let's hold a CCSSE score of 50 or above for each of the 5 domains. And the bet was, if they could get continued improvement and close those gaps, it would drive then the number of degrees. Is that making sense? So as an illustrative example in your world, here's an application of deconstructing a wildly important goal down to the fewest number of battles to help drive that. The next thing that we have to look at, and oh, by the way, we call these things lag measures. Lags are, what do you think of when you hear the word lag? Yeah, behind. It's a historical measure. It's a measure of something that's happened. It's very objective. You can see that. Well, a lot of times this is what leaders will do. They will say, here's the goal, and then that's where it stops. They basically look at their team and say, you go figure out how to go get it done. That's what I pay you for. Report back to me in 90 days and tell me how well it's going. Have any of you ever heard language like that? Okay. Doesn't normally work too well. So what we have to do is apply discipline number 2 and act on the lead measures. Really what we're doing in game theory in discipline number 1 is setting up a series of finish lines or games that the front line can actually impact and play. So we're pulling something out of the whirlwind that's going to enable their ability to have victory on a day in and day out basis. It's a high contribution rate to the organization. In discipline number 2, we're not acting on the lag measure, we're acting on what we're calling the lead measure. Hey, can you guys hear me okay? Back of the room, no? Okay, I'm seeing and feeling this fading in and out. Mike, is that okay? Yeah, okay, good. So we're going to act on what we call the lead measure. So you can think of lead measures if discipline 1 is the game. Discipline 2 are the plays that we're going to run with chronic consistency in order to win the game.
These are the fewest number, and the front line are the ones that figure it out. So in other words, faculty are choosing what they're going to do in order to influence the game. Some of you are probably thinking, you've got to be kidding me. How do we get them engaged?
Higher up. Sorry. No, there's a process associated with that. Yeah. It's a method for making that happen. What we're really doing is we're wrapping game theory. If that's what we're trying to accomplish, the lead measures are the plays that we're going to run. They're the how we get it done. You might think of the what or the lag measure as the big rock, and the lead measures are the leverage for making it happen. We're not looking for everything that we can do. We're looking for the fewest number of behaviors that are actually going to drive the result. And this is a really big deal. And we're going to follow the principles of leverage when we're identifying these plays, these lead measures. We're going to look for, just like a lever, the principles associated with it is influenceability. What is it that I can influence that would have impact on that big rock? And as I move that lever, I expect to see that big rock move. We're looking for causal relationships. And a lot of times, more often than not, we're dealing with behaviors. These are bets. They're not guarantees. I've got a bunch of smart people in the room. We're not using the word predictable. We're using the word predictive. What's the difference between those two words? How is predictable different from predictive? Yeah, if it's predictable, it's a guarantee. But we're making bets on behaviors right now, so we are making the predictive bet. If in fact it was predictable, well, we would want them to do that. But the majority of the time, we're looking for plays that are in fact predictive. And we're just going to go ahead and apply them. What might be a lead measure? Give me 2 lead measures for weight loss. Reduce calories and exercise. The one thing that we do throughout this process is we get real specificity, because if you would say diet, can that be wildly interpreted differently human by human? So what we have to do is get those down to observable behaviors that can be measured. We're calling these lead measures. And so it would be like the number of calories consumed per day, getting your heart rate on the exercise between certain zones for some period of time, sometimes per week. Is this making sense? And then it's the act of tracking those kind of measures that actually helps to cause the behavioral change. If any of you have dieted, you know if you keep a rigorous log of the food that you eat, you're much more likely to be successful in losing weight. Because you're almost shamed in recording the fact that you just logged that donut into your mouth. You don't want to do that again. Okay? So as we start to break this out and we look from the next level down WIGS, or increasing student persistence, for instance, we had faculty who came up with the lead measure of contact 90% of all at-risk bi-weekly in courses. Now, let me ask you this. Would you probably come up with this very same lead measure? If you were trying to create a change, would you come up with that lead measure? Good number of you? Perhaps. But if you were to hand that down to your faculty and say, this is what you're going to do, how compliant will you get there? Yeah. I'm trying to get a laugh right now. Yeah, no, it's tough. But because they were involved in the creation, it becomes a very different game. It's their ownership, it's their commitment to make it happen. Is this making sense? Okay. So at every one of these goals, we start aligning with things that feel like diet and exercise to be able to come up with a causal effect to make it happen. And then they run those plays. And we move on to discipline number 3. Discipline number 3 is where we wrap a scoreboard, a compelling player scoreboard, around the data. So instead of them being disparate data points that live in some kind of a file that you get, actually turn into a player's scoreboard. And so we keep that differently. People, do you believe this to be true? People play differently when they keep score? Yeah. The real operative word here is they keep score. When you keep score on them, they don't care so much. I mean, yeah. Testing, testing. Hello? Is that any better? Yeah, that's much better. You don't want me in and out? Yeah. Okay. So what we're doing is we're wrapping a scoreboard. We're wrapping a scoreboard around those metrics. Now, here's the funny part. We actually have them construct their own scoreboards. And a lot of these turn out to be pretty creative looking things. The intent here, I'm real curious to see what yours might have looked like at Alamo. But, depending upon the organization, you can have some pretty amazing looking art projects that happen that involve glitter glue, pipe cleaners, and you might freak out a little bit when you say things like, hey, this is a really important initiative. This thing is like worth our life. And the last thing I'm going to do is run this with pipe cleaners and construction paper. It's going to be a nice, tight Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to show you all the data. Whose scoreboard does that resemble? A player's or a boss's? Bosses. And this is a really important element to it. If it's their scoreboard, they're going to keep the data differently. They're going to feel different about maintaining it. They're going to own the integrity of it differently. Watch out for your own mindsets in this one. I'm a former CEO. I wouldn't even teach that component. When I first started teaching the 4 disciplines, and my clients were staying disconnected. I had somebody like Meg come observe me, said, Doug, where's the art project teach? And I went, really? It matters. It matters in a really big way. Watch your own mindset. You could predict your outcome if you start putting your leadership on that leadership mindset on it rather than player mindset. Then we get to discipline 4. If you think about it, disciplines 1 through 3 are really setting up the winnable game. We're calling out what's important. We're calling out the plays we're going to run. We're figuring out how to keep score. And then, now we got to actually go execute. And it's in the 4th discipline where we create this cadence, this rhythm of accountability every single week where people get together. It's a very quick timeout, just like in sports, where people capture the choices that they're going to make each week in order to influence the performance of the goal. So every single week, people come prepared to this session to do a 90-second to 3-minute per person report out to say, what did I say I was going to do last week? Did I do it or not? How's that influencing my scoreboard? And then based on those 2 data points right there, what's the choice I'm going to make for next week? So this is all proactive behavior that people are making to intentionally change the performance, not react to the performance. Does that make sense? So it's this dogged collection of choice in the midst of the whirlwind that really makes the difference and starts to drive it and make it happen. So like for instance, if we know that the lead measure is to contact students, one of the choices I may make is, and these are straight up examples that we've seen from institutions that have done it, is I'm going to complete the early alert risk for my at-risk students. That's a choice that somebody can make each week that's going to have influence on it. And I might choose to identify 3 students that do not have their instructional materials at the beginning. I might choose to call Marcus for my face-to-face conference with him to find out why he's not showing up to class. These are all choices that people are making to help drive performance of the lead measure. I might recommend study groups. You can see those kinds of examples. Is this making sense? Pretty simple, right? Simple to understand. Might be a little complex to do, though. And that's really what the 4 disciplines are all about. Is how do we create this rhythm to make this work? I'm just going to do a time check here real quick. Yeah, good. So you can see weekly commitments. What did I say am I going to do next week? How's that influencing my lead? How's that pushing the big wig? That's what we're going for. In its purest, most simple form, this is what the 4 discipline looks like played out in an organization that may not be dissimilar to yours. And so what I want to do is, some of you are probably having some reactions to this. There's usually some things that people hear, and they get excited about it. There's kind of a, oh yeah, I like that. I like that discipline 2 thing. We don't do that. Or I like the the designation of the whirlwind. We've never had that kind of language. I really connect with that. So there's the oh yeah connection, and then there's the yeah but. Okay, I get how you make that work in the private sector, but how do you really make this work in our world? Kind of thought. Or how do you really do this with a bunch of people who independently operate within their own rooms and want nothing to do with us? Maybe I'm reading the crystal ball right here, right now. But what I'd like you to do at your tables is take a moment amongst yourselves. Give me a column on the left. Oh, yeah? Give me a column on the right. Yeah, but. And just talk amongst yourselves and come up with that list. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. Talk amongst yourselves, come up with the oh, yeahs, yeah, buts, and then we're going to respond to those. All right.
This one's okay. Oh, thank you.
Let's bring it back together. Let's bring it back. Come on back. Come on back. All right. You're all table one in my world. There's no better table than the other. So, who wants to be courageous? Give me one oh yeah and one yeah but. How about you? Yeah, back of the room. Yeah, so, oh yeah, look at your circle of influence. All those lead measures we're talking about are things within your influence. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, you know, that's a really great question. As we start to break this down and deconstruct the goal, that's the first trick in that first discipline of finding the battles that really do hit the differing parts of the organization that help to enable it. So like, it's real easy to start to identify the faculty-related issues, but as we start to get into the staff, what might be the war or battle they need to do that's going to best influence that? So the art starts to happen in the deconstruction of that first discipline there. Very good, thank you. How about another table?
And you know what, there's actually a very good example of that from Alamo. Can we just get a quick version of the HR story? How, you know, when we talk about a goal of how do you help students, you're student-centered, and you're in the HR team of a college, you're pretty far away from the student and can sometimes feel like maybe not such a contributor to the goal. And there was just a very interesting application of that. Can you guys share that?
He's not in here, but I'll share. HR had a group, and they're the ones that go out and find jobs. And so they said, how in the world, this is at District, we have 5 colleges. They are as far from students as possible. They say, how can we possibly influence those 2 measures? And so as they thought about it, in fact, I'll tell you, they didn't want to do this. And so as they talked about it, they said, well, maybe we could talk with students about the possible jobs that are available and what they'll make, depending on what they want to do. So they contacted the student development people at one of our colleges, San Antonio College, and they asked them if they could come in their student orientation classes, their student development classes, every time they had a new one, and once a semester, and just start with telling students what kind of jobs were available out there and how successful they could be. So their goal was to hit so many students, 500, over the term at so many each week. And everybody was so enthusiastic about it, they actually ended up being invited to every single one of those courses.
Wow.
And they talked to 2,500 students over a term.
Wow.
And it's now back in the whirlwind, and it's not their wig any longer.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
cool example,
Ow.
huh?
Okay, another table. Shall I just pick one? How about you guys? What was an oh yeah? No. Yeah, Yeah. Yeah, so let's pause on that. We all talk a great game, but there's no getting off the mark, and there's just no time. Does that sound familiar? Okay. Remember, what we're competing with here in collaborating and cooperating, we call it coopetition, we're cooperating with that whirlwind. And really what we're doing is we're finding a few discrete choices that we're going to do each week to drive into that whirlwind. Now, the technique in making that happen is, of course, to schedule that into your week so that you can make it happen. This is not rocket science. People who actually schedule their tasks complete those tasks at a 200 to 300% ratio higher than those who do not. So we're teaching these kinds of theories as we go through the process so that people can actually make it happen. It's the accountability process of the fourth discipline that allows people to keep playing and to actually keep those commitments and get off the ground. Game theory here is basically people are going to show up and report out to each other, not to their boss, and they see that their peers are actually accomplishing things, so therefore over time they will come to. Alamo, did you guys have a similar experience where you had some degree of resistors in the process? Yeah. And then over time, did you see more people moving to actually playing their own self-engagement? It wasn't a notion of you having to tell them. Yeah. So game theory here is a large part of creating that attraction. Yeah. What else? What else can we answer for you? Whether it's an oh yeah or a yeah but. Okay. You love it so much, you want to tell it. Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. You know what? We have, I wish that I had another hour to spend with you because we have this phenomenal thing. You'll find it in the book. It's the bell curve of adoption. And when you look at your adoption rate as you go across your organization, you have your early adopters. They're usually like 20% of the organization. You got a big camel hump in the middle that we'll call potentials, and then you've got the 20% on the other side who just, they're hardwired not to play. Does this sound familiar? Yeah, the distribution of that curve is different everywhere. The message, which is a management theory, is really not the same as the four disciplines, but what we teach in this process is if you want significant change in performance results that require a change in behavior, don't worry about those people on the left-hand side. Yeah, you know what? They're hardwired not to change. And so management theory that most managers have been taught, though, is to manage the margins. Squeeze the blood out of that turnip one more time, the high performers. Basically punish them for adopting early. And then spend the rest of your disproportionate time on those people who aren't going to play. That will not change your results. Now, we go to that early adopter 20 because they're a Pareto effect. They get us the 80% there. But if you want to see breakthrough, when you move just 50% of the middle, you go to 50% of the organization adopting the right level of behaviors, you put a 2.5 time probability of improvement on the same organization that you're already paying right now. And the people in the middle are the people who are willing to play. And most leaders will confess, those are the people they ignore. So there's huge opportunity in the game pull of this process. Those people in the middle are awesome. I'm going to look you in the eye and say, I don't worry about the people on the left. It's a great point. Thank you. Yeah, you have a...
There are a lot of faculty who don't see themselves in this, but there are a lot of student services and other staff people who don't see themselves in this. But when you talk about the things that we chose, things that we chose are about helping students. So what faculty member doesn't want to increase the success in their classes? You know, what person doesn't want to increase the persistence from one semester to another? And when you say to a group of faculty like math in one college, figure out what you collectively are willing to do that might increase during this term your success in the math classes, you can let them get excited about that. You don't tell them what it has to be. You don't say it has to be anything big or small. And if you'll give me one more minute, we have a faculty member here that from the math department at St. Philip's College, and they got so excited about it, they bought wigs.
Yes, we did. However, for that particular, for the math department, we had a wig that, I should say we have wig parties on Friday mornings. Can everyone hear me? No? Okay, on Friday mornings, we have wig parties, and it consists of tacos, coffee, and everyone reporting out on what they've done throughout the week. And our goal was to get students to participate in math workshops on Fridays. So we'd start out at 8 a.m. in the morning, have a wig session for about 20 to 30 minutes. Then we'd assign everyone to a particular topic for the day. Then we break out and we go to different rooms on campus and begin to work on certain topics like factoring, working on fractions, being able to factor in general, not only polynomials, but numbers as well. And that's how we incorporated the wig.
Now, math faculty doing this, I say great.
That
George.
is great.
Yeah.
Woo!
Okay, okay, but since I'm a social and behavioral sciences chair, but I also had to do another one. And ours this semester, ironically, was up on the screen, and we're working on going for every student that ultimately.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here.
Are you good? Okay.
Well, you can dance to that.
It just so happens that right now we're working on, for all the students that do not appear in class at any one class during the semester, we're contacting them to find out why they're not attending. So we're working on trying to ensure that we contact at least 90% of all students that are absent during the week so that we can encourage them to come to class.
Thanks, George. And just think, that's what you think faculty are doing anyway, but this is a deliberate, right? Week to week, intentional.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Creating
Joe
an artificial
Carroll.
sense of urgency. Yeah, nice.
So we wanted to share with you some of the outcomes. Alamo has had some early successes. I think some of them have even surprised you guys as how well it's gone. And I think the other component, and as I was listening to some of the questions and conversations going on, is in working with clients over years of 4D implementations, I would say there is a distinctive arc that is predictable. Leadership reads book. Leadership attends conference. To me, that was always the double whammy personally. It's like the two worst things you ever heard. And then the third was, we're going to do something new, right? So the team reacts predictably to those three points. What also goes on, though, as you get into the 4D process, early on, you get that feedback. One more thing. I can't believe you're going to make us do this. Ugh. As you work through the process, what the magic of keeping 4 disciplines alive is discipline 4. It seems like it's the least, pungent of the 4, but exactly when you talk about having a Friday wig party, employees come around and all of a sudden they start to see success. They start to see movement on those goals, and now it becomes a source of pride. It becomes a source of fun. Early on in the process, when your 4D coach calls and says, how's it going? Typically the response is, well, we moved it only because we knew you were calling. We knew we better get on this or we were going to be up a creek. But you can feel that arc move when the goal starts to make movement. And so it's like many components of training. When you first get started, it's kind of painful and you got to push yourself through it. But once you start to get a rhythm, all of a sudden it takes off on its own. And clearly Alamo is showing early signs of takeoff. And I can't wait to see where you guys are a year from now. So we'll share the slide deck of success at Alamo. Michael is in the room. Doug and I are in the room. If you have any questions, thoughts, we'd be happy to chat with you guys for a while. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.